Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root, from cardswire.com, the NFL wire site from the USA Today family of sites covering the Arizona Cardinals. With me is co-host Seth Cox from revengeofthebirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site, and also one of the hosts of the original Draft Breakdown podcast, which I'm going to keep plugging, especially this time of year. Get on that podcast, listen to the free shows, and it is worth the $2 a month to get their bonus shows, especially this time of year. $4 a month for the written content. It's good stuff. We're at episode 510, Seth. It's time to have a hard conversation, isn't it? No one's had it yet. We rarely are the ones to start conversations, and maybe this will or maybe not. Maybe it won't be, but this is honestly, this is a topic that was big last offseason, and no one's talked about it yet, but it's actually a super big question this offseason, Seth. Is it time to talk about Budda Baker?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things you have to look at, and like you said, it's a tough conversation to have, but it's that time to have it. It's the time to look at, what needs to happen and the future. And it's always tough to have a conversation about a guy that's been kind of a bedrock of a franchise, right? And especially a bad franchise. Let's be honest. Like when you're a team that has, with Budda had mostly down years. I mean, because you got to remember he was not a part of the good Bruce Arians years.
Nope.
Like he was at the very end, the last year, where he was, with Tyrann and we had the questions about how both of them were going to fit, yada, yada, yada. And then, they moved on from Matthew and it was now, Budda's team. He got to become the safety and he's, we limit quarterback wins and, we're not talking in any way about safety wins, but you look at it, I mean, the teams he's been a part of, they've, 3-13, obviously 8-8 his first year, 3-13, 5-10-1, 8-8, 11-6, 4-13 and 4-13. Like, so fans especially get this almost nostalgic, right? Like he's suffered through this with the team, so he deserves whatever he wants, so to speak. And to me, it's a different conversation in that we have to respect what he's done. Clearly, he's been a warrior for this franchise. Basically, if he's been healthy, he's tried to play, right? Like we've never really questioned Budda on that. And then he's only played a full season twice, 2019, I guess his rookie year, but he wasn't really a starter at the time, but 2019 and then 2021, he's always been a little banged up, nicked up. The size has always kind of been an issue because not of the size itself, but his style of play, right? He's a kamikaze. He's a fearless guy. He plays borderline reckless, and not in a negative sense. I don't mean it in a negative way. He's literally the guy that I model one of my kids' games after. I mean, just how he plays the game, his tenacity, the ferocious way he attacks people even while he is undersized, right? So all of that aside, you have to look at it and you say to yourself, what is best for the team. And if it includes being good for Budda Baker in that sense, then it's a win-win. But the reality of the whole situation is, at some point you have to look at the franchise and say, okay, where are we at with the franchise? And that's kind of where you are wanting to talk about, not necessarily, because there's no doubt. I mean, this team is better with Budda Baker on it. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. But how much value is an all-pro safety? And especially how much value is an extremely well-paid all-pro safety?
And that brings us to ultimately, which the question we're asking is, with Budda Baker, this offseason, trade him or extend him? That is ultimately the decision that's going to have to be made. He is entering now. We know he had the contract beef last year. He wanted an extension. He entered last year knowing that the Cardinals were not expected to be good. He was out of guaranteed money. And he said, extend me. And they said, no. And so he said, trade me to a contender. And then they also said no. And ultimately, he ultimately got what was the minimum we wanted. He wanted guarantees. And we always talked about, like, the lack of salary guarantees was never going to actually butt him in the butt. It was more just mental security, emotional security, peace of mind type thing. But now he enters the final year of his contract. He's now 28 years old. He's due $14.2 million. None of it's guaranteed. There is no, there's no big decision they have to make because of a roster bonus that's due. They have thrown him a little more money. There's $400,000 tied into a workout bonus. But ultimately, we have to make a decision. We're going to run into this with two players. It's going to be Budda Baker and James Conner. We're going to run into problems with the contracts of these two players because two very prominent players on this team who are into the last year of their deals, and there is no guaranteed money left on it. And that is a sticking point for players and agents. And so the question has to be asked. Do they and will they cut, not cut, they won't cut him. They will trade or extend. So Budda wanted to be paid, and what his agent said through the media, and he backed down on that a little bit, but basically he wanted to be paid as one of the top safeties, or because his contract doesn't match up with top safeties anymore, and that's how contracts go. If he's going to get an extension, how much? What do you think the price would be that he would be expecting?
That's the tough part, right? So you look at the safety position in general, and we can go off a bunch of things. You talked about spot track, and I think that they do an excellent job kind of putting things into perspective, right? Like, but I've been really diving into PFF's model, especially with how they kind of project salaries. And if you go to like this season and you look at the free agents, there's a couple guys that really kind of fit what Budda is. That's Antoine Winfield, who, a lot of people lamented him not making the Pro Bowl, and Budda Baker making the Pro Bowl over Antoine Winfield. Antoine Winfield's 25, free agent for the first time, going to get that big contract. He's projected at $16.25 million a year. So I think you and I would agree that's not probably, how do you say it without sounding like a jerk? Like it's probably not a good way to spend the money. Would you agree with that?
Right. Well, and let's look at the production. Let's just look productive. As we look at this season, granted, new defense, we are starting to see chinks. He had two injuries in 2022 where he played through the ankle, then he fractured his scapula. He worked his tail off like a dog this offseason to get stronger. Said he didn't want to miss games ever again. What does he do? First week, injures his hamstring. He missed 5 games.
Yeah, And that's one of those, not to cut you off, but that's one of those that actually happens from that, where you overbuild the muscle. That's a very common thing that happens, unfortunately, when you see that, when you see guys that overwork. And I know that sounds insane to say, right?
And who knows what the actual reason was, but you're saying, I'm not going to miss any games, and he gets hurt game one, misses 5 games, and statistically, we're going to look at a couple of things. All right, he had 5 tackles for loss, which was more than he did in 2022, but his 87 tackles were the lowest total since his rookie season. He did not have any pass breakups. He did not have any interceptions. He did not force any fumbles. He did not have any sacks. He did not have any quarterback hits. If you look at it, and this is just a random, the approximate value that he had this season, that's a Pro Football Reference stat that they kind of compute, and it's, for lack of a better thing, I guess it's the closest thing to football war that you have in baseball, with it's only for one side. He's had AVs of as high as 14, which was in 2020. His AV this year was 5, which is the lowest he has had in his career, tied with the 2018 year. And so I'm not saying he's a player in decline, because at 28 years old, you should be able to feel like he's got at least a couple of more years of quality productive football. However, in this defense this year, his impact was more intangible than tangible playmaking on defense. He's still extremely smart. He tackles very well. But that said, a guy that had nothing but tackles and going into the final year of his contract, do you want to pay him an average of $12 to $15 million per year?
Yeah, and that's the thing is, I mean, you look at it, the market is saturated right now. So let me ask you this. Do you think it's going to be plausible to deal with Budda after Winfield and Kyle Duggar and Cameron Pearl all sign, kind of the top 3 safeties in this year's free agent class? Because if you're able to wait, what that does, or what that allows you to do, is make a decision then based off kind of what the market's dictating, right? And you say, okay, well, the market's saying that, Antoine Winfield at 25 is worth, let's say he gets a three-year, $50 million deal. That's a little more than, it's about that $16.25 million, right? If Antoine Winfield is worth that, and Budda he's only going to be 28 this year. So, but that's 3 years older than Antoine Winfield, the all-pro safety. I mean, wouldn't you think like 336 is like the max you can do for him? Or are we going to get to the point where the nostalgia plus the time, plus the, he's stuck around and been a good soldier, so, he needs that 15 or 16. Like, you can't get caught up in that this situation.
And honestly, sure. That'd be fantastic to pay him that much. Again, we are on this podcast, pro player get paid, but we also recognize team build. That doesn't mean, we're not saying that Budda shouldn't get paid $15 million a year. If he can get $15 million a year, I'm absolutely for that.
1,000%.
Does that mean the Cardinals should pay, or if that, I guess the question is that the best way to use their cap space and their money at this point in time, this offseason, with what they're trying to accomplish?
Well, and I can double down on that, or kind of add to that. Is his impact, and again, there's no question, this isn't a question of his ability. Nobody is questioning that. but is his impact overall on a defense that has been ranked the worst defense in the NFL, I think 3 times while he's been, one of the captains, and that's, neither here nor there, but like, is that where you want to continue to invest? Or do you take that, if it is 15 million, say it's 15 million, and you say, oh, you can go get, let's just throw names out, right? Like just, you can go get a guy that we talked about the other night in terms of a guy like, you can go get Grover Stewart and Taylor Tart, and you can sign both those guys for 17 million total. Like, isn't that kind of more necessary than, even though there's nothing wrong with Budda, you're not trying to replace him because of production or anything like that, but like, you just like having the highest paid safety that's been very, very good to great during his career here is not working out. So maybe it's time to try a different route type of thing.
Yeah. And they already have, now granted, Jalen Thompson's contract isn't massive. They already are paying him, and he will make 2024 $8.3 million.
But that's the other shoe to that.
Yes,
Jess.
and he's going to count 12.5 against the cap this coming year, and
right.
He was, and here's the Jalen. He's 25 years old, and ball productive as well.
Well, and I think the last portion of that, Jess, can you have 27.5 to 30 million in money wrapped up in your safeties?
Not
like, again,
when you don't have a pass rush or an interior presence.
Right. Like if they had been able to this year, let's say, let's just spitball and say they were able to draft Jalen Carter or Will Anderson, right? In this year's draft and kind of load up on that defensive side of the ball. Maybe, you can look at it and you go, hey, we've got these young bucks that are, defensive rookie of the year contenders. We can continue to pay veteran safeties. But like when you don't have, like you said, interior, edge, or cornerbacks, but you have really high paid safeties, it's just like, and this isn't a Monty thing, right? Like I wrote an article today that was that I don't know if you saw the ESPN Plus article, but like they asked executives about the offseason and movement and things of that nature. And one of the comments was about the Arizona Cardinals and how they're going to contend for the playoffs next year. And it's a very nicely blurb from a AFC executive and an NFC offensive coach. Just a really, very nice blurb about the Cardinals. But it's kind of crazy to go back and look at the fact that this team, and I know some of it was self-inflicted by Monty, but for the most part, this team was hamstrung by $70 million in dead money. Like, that's absurd to think about when you're like, oh, they could have used, think going back to last season, a Sheldon Rankins or all of these free agents that we kind of talked about over last year. And then you look at it and you're like, yeah, your signings were LJ Collier and Carlos Watkins, both respectable players that you were hoping to get something from. And both of they combined played, one game. Like, and so, yeah, it's like, you can't just continue to downplay or even undervalue that front and that interior, especially, but the front line, and just continue to be like, hey, but we've got these two phenomenal safeties. It's like, yeah, there's a reason that they both have 125 tackles a season. And It's because nobody in front of them can tackle. Like, it's not like, again, it's not a shot at them. It's not their fault. They haven't done anything. But at the same time, It's like, do you really want to continue to make the mistake is a strong word, but do you continually want to fail in the same way over and over? Like,
Yeah.
The whole definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different outcome. And like, that's kind of where they're at now.
There is one thing about Budda's play that worries me. I'm not predicting this, so if anyone construes this and for some reason, any reason this got to that, I'm not trying to trash Budda. There is one concern I have is because of the build that he has with the physicality that he plays, that perhaps there will become a point, I don't know if it's begun now, or if it's coming in the next couple of years, where his body will not hold up for an entire season. And the fact that then there's the ankle. Now, ankles happen all the time. The the fractured scapula, a little concerning. The hamstring could be explained a number of ways, but we've seen it from a lot of physical type safeties before, that with the physicality they play, with the frames that they have, it catches up with them at some point. Now, that said, I would fully expect Budda put into a contending team's defense to suddenly have all pro numbers again. Because the way especially on a bad defense, like the Cardinals had this season, it's easy to not challenge Budda, right? It's easy to go, we're not going to do anything near him, so that makes it so it's really hard for him to make plays on any balls in the pass game. And honestly, the way they play pass defense, which is keeping plays in front of them, makes it a little more difficult for him to come out of nowhere and make plays on the ball. So he's a great tackler. And Thompson was the one that they used more for deep coverage, right? Which allows him to make more plays on the ball, get turnovers and things like that. You put him in a talented defense with great players up front, you're going to see Budda making massive plays, right? We've even seen it in Arizona. But my prediction, and like if I had, and this is something if y'all remember when DK Kennard was a guest on my show a year ago, one of the offseason shows, and we talked about his book and this and that. He went through the coaching change in Detroit. And he said if there's one thing that you will always see is that you will always find that within a year, that first or second offseason under a new coaching staff, that there will be talented players, very good players, that are let go or traded. And he kind of pointed to like Darius Slay in Detroit. He went on to be an all-pro, great in Philadelphia. And I think we're beginning to see this is different. This is different than, say, the DeAndre Hopkins situation last year, even Isaiah Simmons, Zach Ertz to some extent. This would be that big move. As much as they love Budda in that building, this offseason is the decision they have to do that. And my prediction is he will be traded. That is my prediction. Would I trade him? I think now is the time to do it, because you have, they need so much help on defense.
Yeah, and people misconstrue what you're saying, and it's something that I think we've tried to articulate, but it's never easy. They need so much help on defense, and people will be like, then why are you taking away one of the two best players?
Because
it's
the impact of getting 3 or 4 up, front 7 players will have far more impact defensively than extending Budda Baker, whose level of play we already know.
Right. And that's just the reality of it. It's not that the safety position is not important. It is heavily important, but it's also one of those, it's kind of like running back, right? Like, it's one of those positions that relies so much on other players to be able to do their job. And so for Budda to really excel or be the best of himself, it takes a guy, it takes adding talent, and we know, we're just realistic. We know it's not going to be Chris Jones. It's probably not going to be a Justin Matabuke, no matter how much you and I would love to see them add a phenomenal 26-year-old interior presence, right? Probably not going to even be a Christian Wilkins. But then once you get to like the Leonard Williams, the DJ Readers, the Grover Stewarts, those guys, and you look at it, you're like, oh, you could add one or two of those guys along with an older guy like a Fletcher Cox or a Daquan Jones or a Maurice Hurst, and you can add those guys to this roster. And then all of a sudden you've added two or three guys, and I get people are like, well, why don't you add players like that with Budda? But you like, that's just not how the salary cap works. Like, you have to make decisions and
you can there find ways to make the salary work. However, I will say there will be, because of he already has I think it is, no matter what, $3.9 million of prorated money. You can't avoid that. Even if you paid him a healthy signing bonus up front that went over 3 years, or maybe add a couple of void years, and then you line him up to make, his salary is $1.5 million, you're still going to look at, now granted, cap number this year, $18.5 million. $18.5 million. That's a really big cap hit.
And what'd you say? And you said
you're probably going to look at minimum a $10 million cap hit to extend him. So you'll save money. But yeah, Jalen's at 12 this year.
So you're literally paying $31 million for your safeties. and you, again, like, this isn't a shot or anything, but like, you have one of the worst defenses in the NFL, if not the worst defense in the NFL. Like, again, just to roll it back or do it again and be like, hey, we're going to upgrade in the draft. Okay, but you might add 2 players in free agency and 2 players in the draft.
And well, yeah, 2 players in the draft, but I don't think you're going to get a first round pick for him. Maybe a second this year and a day 2 pick next year.
Yeah, I could see you getting a second and a third, or a second and a fourth.
Yeah. Guess what? A second round pick this year, another, that would give them a 7th selection in the top 100. It would give them a second round pick. And obviously you're gonna get a downgrade, and you're going to have a downgrade at safety. But
you and I have kind of talked about this too.
Can you survive if you significantly improve at the front 7, and you replace Budda with an average player or a slightly above average player?
But you and I have talked about it too. What's crazy about Jonathan Gannon's defense is how he tends to get a lot out of safeties and linebackers that aren't exactly the highest paid or
I'm not saying we want Andre Sacheret starting.
No.
I'm not saying necessarily that, but look, Sacheret wasn't bad, but you can get a decent safety.
Well, so to your point, you can get a Marcus Epps and a CJ Gardner-Johnson really easily.
You could actually get you could get Gardner-Johnson this offseason. You literally can.
Right, and that's kind of my point. Like, you can get those guys very, very easily. They're not difficult type of players, impact players to find. And that's, again, not a shot at those guys, but it's just look at the names that you can add. You mentioned CJ Gardner-Johnson, a guy like Jordan Whitehead, who's been really good for the Jets, right? Jordan Fuller from the Rams, and all these guys are like their projected salaries like 2 years, $10 million.
Mm-hmm. And the Cardinals historically have gotten good production from just random safeties that they bring in.
Right. And so that's the thing. So you have this opportunity, you have this ability. It probably, as much as it hurts to lose a franchise cornerstone, it's one of those situations where sometimes for the betterment of the future, you have to let go.
Yeah. This is,
by the way, this is not something that you and I are like advocating, like actively, like you got to get rid of Budda Baker.
No. But the decision's going to have to be, one of these two things is going to happen. I do not think he will be on this team in 2024 under the current terms of his contract. And therefore, they either have to extend or trade him. And I think that's the only way around it, because I don't think we already had to deal with last offseason the Budda issues, and that's not going away. It's the same thing. He's still not happy with his contract. The difference is, there's going to be some talk about cutting DJ Humphries. That's a very different thing. They're not going to cut Budda, 1. 2, if they trade him, it's not going to hurt things in the locker room, because we already know that Budda has asked to be traded. And therefore, this will not hurt the culture of the locker room in the least, because this is not the team giving up on a player. This is a team that's doing right by a player, basically. Like they're not going to pay him. And so last year they did right by him. They said they gave him a little bit extra cash. They gave him an extra $300,000 and guaranteed the salary, and said, all right, next offseason. And that's the time. And so if you had to predict, my prediction is he will be traded. It just hasn't come up yet. It hasn't come up yet, but I fully would expect that to happen. I think this will start to pick up later in the offseason, probably closer to the beginning of free agency, and definitely from the between free agency and the draft, because if he's traded, I'm sure they will want to make that deal to get at least a pick in this year's draft. So what is your prediction? Is it going to be trade, or is it going to be extend?
With Monty, I'm not as confident, but I still tend to hedge that they'll extend him. But I'm hoping that with the new regime that this is less a commonality of what we've seen with Bidwill, and insisting on guys like, because that is one of the things we probably didn't cover that we probably should have.
Bidwill probably wants Budda on the team.
Right, because he's big on those Cardinals for life type things. So, I'm not opposed to it by any means, and so I'm just interested to see how it plays out, because I'm hedging towards he'll be on the roster or they'll extend him. But it would be nice if it was the opposite.
Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now move on to your favorite part of the show, the listeners. We're going to talk about the playoffs this weekend. It's our picks, predictions, and props. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. There's only 2 games to talk about this weekend, so I guess maybe this won't be as long in a segment. We've got the 2 championship games, the conference championships. We've got the AFC Sunday early afternoon at 1 p.m. Arizona time, 3 p.m. kick Eastern, between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Baltimore Ravens. And in the nightcap, in the what ultimately will be the Super Bowl slot, it's a late afternoon, early evening kick for Arizona at 4:40 p.m., 6:40 p.m. Eastern, which is the Lions and the 49ers. I know there is a strong sentiment among a lot of hardcore NFL people, big NFL fans. They want to save us all from the Chiefs and the Taylor Swift people in the Super Bowl. I don't care about that. One, I think this is fun. I have a family. I have children who absolutely adore Taylor Swift, and I have a daughter who already knows quite a bit about football, honestly, because of what I do. But definitely is a Chiefs fan for the rest of the playoffs for a lot of reasons. Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce, Taylor Swift. But first, before we talk props, this game, the Ravens should beat them, right? The Ravens, with how they're constructed this year, should win. But are you ready to bet against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs?
No, and that's kind of what it comes down to, right? It's like, you're exactly right. This is a game where you look at it outside of quarterback, there's not a single position that you're like, oh, Kansas City's better. Like, outside of quarterback, there's not a single position where you're like, this is Kansas City. I mean, even think about this. Mark Andrews is back, and he's one of the best tight ends in the NFL. Now, it's not fair to expect him to be at Travis Kelce's level, but with the way that the Ravens defense works, especially their inside linebackers and safeties, is Travis Kelce going to put up those numbers this week? You look at this whole thing and it just comes down to the fact that I am of the opinion still that until you consistently beat Patrick Mahomes, I can't bet against Patrick Mahomes. The Ravens in the playoffs haven't beat Mahomes. Very few people beat Mahomes in the playoffs. I mean, I know he's 3-2 in AFC Championship games. I would love to have any player that was been to 5 championship games. I mean, let's be honest. So I'm going begrudgingly with the Chiefs. So they're +4. I'm going to take them on the money line.
Same.
So obviously they're covering the 4. I'm going to take the over 44.5 as well. I think this one is a good one. I think we get a good game, 27-24 Chiefs.
I like that. Yeah, and this is exactly this type of thing again. Everything about this Ravens team should, like, if they're playing the way they should and then they're capable of, they can totally cause problems and run away with this game. The problem is, however, Kansas City is battle-tested. Now, the Ravens did get the monkey off their back a bit. However, who did they do it against? They did it against basically a rookie team that made the playoffs in the Texans, who were very good. I don't want to take anything away from what the Texans did. However, that's far different than going against a team that is battle-tested. You're going against one of the very best coaches in history in Andy Reid, one of the best quarterback, like the best quarterback of this generation, now a historically great quarterback in Patrick Mahomes. And this Kansas City defense is the best one that Patrick Mahomes has had. And so, that's going to make props a little bit difficult for me, but I also am taking the Chiefs not only to cover but to win outright, because I still, at the end of the day, when you need a drive, if it comes down, unless Baltimore is running away with it, that if this game is close in the fourth quarter, Mahomes will make the plays that he needs to make, and ultimately they will win the game because they know how to do it, because they've done it time and time and again.
Yeah, and that's where it kind of goes to. So you talked about props a little bit. So it's a difficult one. First off, you look at, as you mentioned, the Ravens in general, right? Like, they're a very incredibly talented team, one of the best teams in the NFL, if not the best team in the NFL, right? But they're not perfect, and they've lost. If you take out that loss in week 18 to the Steelers, they've had some losses that have made you scratch your head. The first one was their overtime loss to Indy, right? Early in the season. Then they lost to the Steelers early in the season. Remember, at one point these Ravens were 3-2. And then they lost to the Browns. I think the Browns loss was right after Deshaun Watson got hurt, or he got hurt in that game. Oh no, that was one of the games he actually played. So I'm sorry, I'm wrong about that. But the big thing with the Ravens in these losses has been that a great defense they for some reason are getting burned by guys that are not great. And what I mean by that is, you go into these games, in this one, you had their first loss, Zach Moss, 122 yards rushing. I mean, Zach Moss, 122. Come on, man. Like, Gardner Minshew threw for 227 yards and a touchdown in the game. Zach Moss had 122 rushing yards. Like, it's crazy to see them do that. And in their first loss, the loss that I would say matters to those Steelers, Kenny Pickett threw for 224 yards and a touchdown. They held Jalen Warren and Najee Harris in check. Those two combined for 77 rushing yards. Combined. But they weren't able to slow down George Pickens in that game. Pickens had 130 yards and a touchdown. I don't know if Rashee Rice is as good as George Pickens yet. But he has an outstanding game already in the playoffs. He's been very reliable. And then, we mentioned Travis Kelce. So, and then in that Browns game, it was kind of the same thing. Jerome Ford, 107 yards rushing. You had Watson put up 213 yards passing and a touchdown in the game. But in those games, all of them kind of have the same thing. You have Lamar Jackson not doing Lamar Jackson things, meaning you have him turning the ball over or not throwing the ball well. And I think more than their defensive struggles, that's kind of what it boils down to for them. If Lamar isn't throwing for touchdowns, because even last week we talked about it in our recap, the numbers didn't look or maybe make a lot of sense, but he still threw for 2 touchdowns and ran for 2 touchdowns. In those losses, all of those losses, I think he has 0 touchdowns combined passing. I'm just double checking my math to make sure I'm accurate on that. Yeah, so he has 0. Oh no, he has 1 touchdown and 3 interceptions in those losses. It's kind of the key to the game. And I know that's silly to say, but like if Lamar isn't able to convert as a passer, his effectiveness as a runner is kind of negated because they'll give up him running the ball as long as others aren't getting involved as well. But when he's able to do both at a high level, and you spelled it out after the last game, right? Like first time in NFL history that you had a guy run for 2 touchdowns, throw for 2 touchdowns, and have over 130 passer rating. Like first time in it, like if that's, and he doesn't have to be at that level, obviously, but if he's not able to throw the ball consistently and for touchdowns, then all of a sudden it really changes the dynamic of their offense. I think getting Mark Andrews back is big, but overall, this is a game where it's going to come down to, is Lamar able to do enough, not just throwing the ball, but throwing the ball for touchdowns for this to happen? His over-under is 1.5, and it's plus 140. There's a reason for that. Like that is, everybody understands that's kind of the number. If he hits 2 touchdowns passing, they're probably going to win this game. It's just a matter of, will he do that?
Yeah. And so as we look at some of these props, the one that I kind of like up for the quarterbacks, I don't know. I'm hemming and hawing when it comes to some of like the passing type things. But if we look at the rushing numbers, and for me, it's not total rushing yards. It's the receive. It's the rush. It's not the passing yards, rather. It's the rushing yards, and it is for longest rush. And what I like about this is, can we pull it up? I'm having issues pulling crap up. Interceptions.
Well, longest rush yards on DraftKings right now. Who are you?
Mahomes I was looking at Mahomes at Mahomes
12
over
and a half,
12 and a half at minus 105. I think that's a really good one because, you could go over 16 and a half for Lamar, but it was like 125. So that's fine. But I really like the Mahomes one.
Yeah, I like that one. And Justice Hill over 11 and a half at minus 105. Both of those feel, I don't want to say gimme because there's never a gimme, but both of those feel like, because when Hill gets in, that's where his carries tend to be at, right? Is like they look for him to make not necessarily a big play, but a long run. Last week he had a 14-yard rush, so that would have got you over in that. You look at most of his games this year, Justice Hill, it's not every game, but when he gets the touches, he's got an 11, a 14, a 14, a 15, a 18, a 27, and a 41-yard rush on the season. He rarely gets enough carries to even make a difference, but he, in those 4 to 6 carries, he usually breaks one for about 15 yards. What about Pacheco at over 15 and a half?
Love it. I love that one.
Okay, I was going to say because
he'll break one at least. I think he breaks one at least in this game.
Yeah, and Devin Singletary was 16 last week. That was his long, and we know that Pacheco, barring injury, obviously, is going to get more carries than 9 carries.
Yes, yes, and because his style of running, he's fun to watch. The memes that are hilarious about him, but the way he attacks the open field is really fun to watch. Here's one that I kind of like a prop. And this is a big money one, is that it's the combined touchdown score and win. And it's not a crazy one. It's Isaiah Pacheco to score and Chiefs to win at plus 350. I think, of all those combined, it's a little mini parlay basically. But it's not a crazy one. I mean, Isaiah Pacheco in a good game, like if the Chiefs are winning, you could totally see Isaiah Pacheco scoring a touchdown. And the win plus 350. I think that's really super, super reasonable.
Yeah, there's a couple passing or receiving props I really like. First one, I actually like Mark Andrews over 35 and a half. He's a security blanket. I think he's going to hit that. I like Marquez Valdez-Scantling. He's over 14 and a half. That's one catch for him typically. And if you want to get funky and ladder him, depending on your book, 20 plus 20 or 25 plus is plus 220. I wouldn't go to plus 40 unless you're feeling really froggy. That's plus 600. So you have to, understand kind of what you're getting yourself into there. Like it is a longer shot, but his under over at 14 and a half just seems incredibly low because it's typically just one catch for him.
Yeah. Mark Andrews, like you said, over 35 and a half. You want to ladder that to the 50 plus. That's plus 160 on BetMGM. I like that. I am I super confident in that? No, but in terms of the potential value there, I like that. Especially if you like the over 35 and a half, being able to get plus 160 on 14 yards more is a nice little value.
And then the other one that I like is, even though it's really high, I do like Rashee Rice's over of 59 and a half. I would take him up to 70 in this game, which would give you a little bit more juice on that. Kelsey's an interesting one because 62 and a half is a good number. I think it's fair. I think he's going to get the over there, but we saw last week, I think he finished with like 65 on 7 catches or something like that. So it's
him as a touchdown thing. That's another like the touchdown score plus win. You get plus 375 with the Kelsey touchdown and Chiefs win.
And then one more if you want to look at it. I would just take a gander at whatever book you use. I wouldn't take it on DraftKings. It's not good enough. I don't know what it is on BetMGM. But Lamar Jackson, 2+ touchdown scores. Just take a look at it. I don't know what it is, but it's plus 650 on this one. Not the juice isn't good enough, but I do like if you can get him at plus 1,000 or more, just two plus touchdowns. That's a good. That's always a good bet. What about this Lions 49ers game?
Give me one more on kicking props on Ravens, and this is since we're leaning towards a higher scoring game. Both kickers plus odds on over 2.5 extra points made. Plus 100 for Tucker, plus 155 for Butker. So
okay, I like those two.
Yeah, those are good. Yes, I am not confident in the outcome like for Detroit winning, but I love the Lions, how they match up with the Niners, because the Lions' strength is their run defense, which will limit what the 49ers can do offensively. So I think that they will slow the 49ers. And I think, as we've seen over the last few weeks, is that teams can run. They can be successful running the ball against San Francisco, though. Like outcome, I'm taking the Lions to cover the +7 at plus. And on BetMGM right now, you get plus. So it's even money at +100 if to cover the +7.
That's good. Yeah, it's -105, so almost even money. I also like the over in this one, 51.5. I'm leaning towards the Niners winning this still. But yeah, I like the Lions to cover the +7, as you said. One of the worst props that I can just recommend to avoid, even though it's probably going to hit. Christian McCaffrey first touchdown score +280 is not good value. You look at like the other games, like Lamar's +600. In this game itself, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery are all +1,000 or heavier. And I get that they're looking at it going, oh, the Niners are going to score first. It's just not good value. I mean, it's not worth the juice on that. Do you feel like that 86.5 is a trap? I mean, man,
yes,
it feels like you take.
I don't want to touch that because I think Detroit's defense might. Yeah, so I am not confident in the 86.5 at all.
Yeah, I do like the prop. I gotta find it. The first one, it's weird that they don't have Purdy's rushing total, but they have his
they do on BetMGM. They have over 7.5 yards at -110. That's one rush. That honestly, that's picking up one first down. That's easy money.
Yeah, and that's where I usually go with him. Jahmyr Gibbs over 75.5 rush and receiving yards. I do like that. You can get alternate on DraftKings. I don't know how BetMGM works, but on DraftKings you can get an alternate at 100 plus at +245. So I do like those. And then the other thing you could look at for one, because his usage is beyond absurd. So it's always worth a little flyer in these situations. To look at Sam Laporta is plus 2,200 to have the most combined receiving and rushing yards. Again, it's probably going to be McCaffrey. I'm not saying like, oh, I'm smarter than the books. However, Laporta's usage is, and especially since he came back healthy, he had 11 targets. He had 9 catches for 65 yards. That's not a very efficient day. And he usually has a little more efficiency than that. Plus 2,200 stealing. Debo's plus 2,800. Typically, I would say that would be great value, but I truly don't know if he's even going to play in this game. So, while the bet will void if he does play early as a decoy but can't really do anything, you're basically throwing your money away, which is always something you want to try to avoid doing as much as possible.
Right. In terms of general receiving yards, Laporta over 48.5 is good, and I also like him at 75 plus.
That feels easy.
Right. And then you can get plus 75 plus on the alternate line at plus 290. And that one's not as certain, but when you're getting almost 3 times, fantastic.
Yeah, and the other one, like I said, Jahmyr Gibbs over 22.5. That feels like stealing. I don't understand these Lions numbers. And then the passing props. I mean, maybe I'm missing something here. I'm really surprised that Goff is below Purdy in this. Purdy's over under on DraftKings is 275.5. Goff's is 258.5. I don't know, man. Like I would take the over. I would ladder that. I wouldn't go crazy, but if you want to go up to 300, he had 287 last week. I think they're going to probably be playing from behind a little bit more, so he's going to throw a little bit more. So over 300 is not absurd for Jared Goff, and that's plus 275. Like I said, I get the touchdown part of it. Purdy over 1.5 touchdowns is basically begging you to not take it because it's minus 195. It's terrible value. But I don't understand the passing yards itself where he's at 275.5. The value is just not any good there.
How about on the kicking prop? We love looking at the kicking props. Michael Badgley over 1.5 field goals, plus 150.
Yeah, that feels. I mean, again, lock is always a hard thing to say, but that feels like something that they'll.
Well, you got that Niners defense. Like you can totally see them holding them at least twice in the red zone, right?
Right, and then depending on what your opinion is of this game. I like both of the PATs. Over 3.5 for Moody, over 2.5 for Badgley. Those are both plus money.
Yeah, those are nice as well. But yeah. Is it? Let me see if we can build touchdown score and win. Since we think the 49ers are going to win. Let's see what they got in terms of 49ers stuff.
I'm guessing that McCaffrey won like plus 100.
No, it's minus 150. That's dumb.
Yeah, it's a terrible bet. Like, that's the thing. Is like anytime you get any type of parlay, and that's it is a parlay. It's not really, but it's a parlay. But anytime you get any type of parlay that's minus money, don't play it because all it takes is one fluke where they quarterback sneak on the one and then they throw for 3 touchdowns, or the Lions upset them. Especially coming off of what we saw last week for the Packers. Like, it's just, you want those type of bets to be like Jess was saying earlier, like plus 280, plus 250 or higher, basically. If it's not higher than plus 250, just stay away from it because it's just not worth the money.
I don't love any of them on the 49ers ones.
No, man, it's a tough one. There are a couple interesting ones. Chase Young to have a quarter sack, and I know you don't get those on BetMGM, but Chase Young to have a quarter sacks plus 160, and then Alan McNeil to have a quarter sack, so share a sack, potentially half a sack, is plus 310. The interior of the 49ers offensive line hasn't been too hot. Aiden Hutchinson really dictates things. He's going to have a big game, whether it's on the stat sheet or drawing attention to himself. That, when it's that skewed and plus money, I like to look at those because he had 5 sacks this year. McNeil did. And he hasn't had a sack since week, it looks like 14-ish. And so he's kind of due for the way he plays and what he does. So I would look at that too. But yeah, this is an interesting one, man, because like you said, it could come down to, can Brock Purdy make plays and last game, or maybe not even that, right? Can the Lions take advantage when Brock Purdy makes a mistake? Because the Packers couldn't. The only team that really has this year has been the Ravens.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it's going to go. But this is an interesting one, man, because like you said, if they're able to control the run game, number 2 run defense in the NFL, if they're able to control the run game and really force things into Purdy's hands, one, Aiden Hutchinson, like I'm telling you, is going to have a field day. Their right side of their offensive line for the 49ers is bad. But his value is not great. You have to get a full sack, and it's basically even money, so not super worth it. But if that's what happens, you look at this game and you say to yourself, man, this is a game where you could see an upset. How cool would it be to see the Lions in a Super Bowl, man? Even if they don't win, like just to see them get there.
Yeah, that would be, let's go for that. Let's want that, but not have the Lions win it. We can't.
Yeah, right.
We like we've discussed, we can't let the Detroit Lions leave their misery completely. Not while the Cardinals.
Right. Right. We can't be the worst team in the NFL.
No.
Or franchise in the NFL.
No. So with that, we will end this edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, Best of Cardinals Talk on the web. It was episode 510. We'll be back again next week to talk more. We'll react to what we saw in the championship and the conference title games, and we'll have more Cardinals offseason stuff. That's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. Thanks for listening as always. We'll be back again next week.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.